I really like the modern times between getting an airplane in a box and getting it to the field. I think this ARF stuff might just catch on. All the work we put into getting these planes together and getting them right so they don't fall apart in the air makes taking the time to get it right before we put this thing in the air well worth the effort. In this video, we'll walk you through some of the high points of putting this plane together, but it is really pretty simple. See the full version of this story on my website. At the end of that story, we'll include a link to a PDF version of the instruction manual. This plane is rated for up to a 50cc engine, but I'm going to use an EME 35. The instruction manual for this plane says we need to add 19 ounces of lead to the firewall. And guess how much this electric starter weighs? One of the reasons EME engines run so well is that they come with a genuine Walbro carburetor, no copies. EME supplies this see-through template for mounting the motor. Even I get the engine in the right place with this template. When mounted up, the engine's carburetor is pretty close to the firewall. Regardless of that carb spacing, I almost always drill a 1 7/8 inch hole just to make sure that everything's breathing well in the cowl. Access to the engine bolts on the back of the firewall looks better than it is. I ground this Allen wrench down to fit, and that made putting the motor on very easy. I want to get rid of all the weight I can back at the tail, so I use carbon fiber tubes with titanium ends for the push rods for the elevators. I also soldered up the flying wires to get rid of a little bit of hardware back there and to make them more aerodynamic. Like that's going to make a big difference on a plane like this. The included hardware is very heavy duty, but you want to make sure you watch for conflicts down here. I changed out the rudder hardware with the set that I had already because they're a little narrower. It gives me the 3 inches that I need but stays away from the elevator hardware. Most of my assembly time was figuring out how to get everything inside this cabin. I put the batteries all the way up front, but that meant bringing out leads for the charging. I extended the balance and charge plugs so I can do all my charging with the batteries still on the plane. I use good batteries, a good charger, and a very slow charge rate. I've never had a problem with it. The instructions say to glue the windshield on this plane, but I think that's a plot. I promise you, as soon as that windshield glue dries, you're going to need to stick your hand in there to get at something in the interior. This cabin looks huge until you try getting both hands in there. And no, all those windows don't come out. Those are all installed at the factory, and we're real happy about that. But none of them come out to give you more access. I live and fly in the real world, and that means there's only one way to put this windshield in, and that's with some screws. I already had a guy tell me that the windshield didn't look right with all those screws in it. It's like he didn't see all the other windows on the airplane. One of the last things I did for building the L4 was to install the doors. There's an upper and a lower, both come pre-hinged, you just have to epoxy them in. Cutting the cowl was complicated a little bit because of the electric starter, but not bad. And no, I'm not putting a choke servo in. I put a piece of wire and made a hole for it. The guy that didn't like the screws in the windshield probably ain't gonna like this either. And while I had the Dremel out, I opened up the front of the fake motors that work like scoops. I want lots of air coming through this cowl. I noticed that the fuselage was smaller than the cowl, so I made some wooden blocks to hold the cowl open at the mounting bolts, and now I have exit area around the whole back end of the cowl. You say you want 3 times as much exit as you have intake. This is the morning of a maiden flight, and it's the first time I shrunk the covering down. The whole covering and graphics installation looks like they did a very good job. And the last thing before I get it in the trailer is I put all the protectors on it to make sure it stays pretty all the way to the field. All of the protective covers and the wing bag that you see on this plane are stuff that I make in my own shop, and we do sell them, so you can check my website, flyingrc.net, for details. The idea for these fuse covers came from one of my customers, and now I really like having them. And of course, there's the wing bag. Wanting to protect my wings better got me involved in all of this. Now I wouldn't load a plane up without them. I'll be doing a separate review of the EME 35 and the electric starter. I will say that both of them impressed the people that saw it fly. Maiden Day had a pretty stiff crosswind, and we see how effective this wing is. The upwind wing flies way before the other one. I'd find out that the L4 doesn't seem to like just rolling the throttle on. It seems like it wants to go from not flying to flying all in a pretty short distance. The wind was pretty strong and gusting, and sometimes 90 degrees to the runway. I was getting tired of just pecking around and just gassed it. And it turns out that's pretty much what the L4 wanted. We had the EME 35 set just a little bit rich on the top end, but that really didn't make any difference. It had plenty of power to pull this plane up. and it also likes a little rudder to help it turn. Here I was finding out that the air is even more lumpy up a ways than it was on the runway, and that makes it hard to get any trims that you can really be satisfied with. I decided to trim it as best I could today, and we'll get a nice calm day. I'll really get it trimmed out. For now, I just wanted to get some time on the plane and the motor. I was noticing that no matter which way I went, the upwind wing always lifted up, and it pretty much eliminated getting an aileron setting that I'd like for the rest of the day. Here I slowed it down a bunch coming downwind to see how it acted, and it was nice and stable. When it started dropping or feeling mushy, I just gave it a little bit of throttle and it flew away nicely. The AME-35 and the L-4 both don't mind flying in the wind a whole bunch. This was going to be just a trial setup for landing just to see how it looked on a short final. But it came in, and even though the wind was kind of bumpy, it settled in pretty decent, so I let it stay on the ground. Here I was just seeing how easy it was to fly the tail, then noticed that I was running out of runway. The wind was getting a little worse, but I was confident enough in the L4 and the AME-35 to try it again. And here I found out you just gas it, and it pretty much just jumps off the ground. That actually surprised me a little bit, because I thought with a 35 this plane was going to need a little more runway to take off, but apparently not. I was just flying around getting more confident in the plane. Then the wind decided to show me who's boss. I didn't do none of that. Every once in a while the wind would decide I was going to go in a different direction and just jack up the wing and turn it. But don't panic, give it a little bit of power and it flies right out of it. When landing from the right on windy days at our field, you get some really goofy winds down in this end of the field. And here it started throwing a plane around. So I decided to give it some gas and live to try this again. Okay, this time wasn't much better either, but I did feel more in control, so I just pulled back the gas and flew it down to the ground. And we survived maiden number 2. And that landing made me decide that we'd done all the maiden flights we're going to do for today. We'll save this plane for another day.